Welcome back, everybody. This is the Indie Grounds Podcast, second episode. Welcome. In this episode, instead of looking at a band, we're going to be looking at a single musician. Now, the musician's name is Mikel Jollett. He is the frontman for the indie rock band, the Airborne Toxic Event. He's their main singer, he's their guitarist, he's their writer. Now, the reason why he was chosen was because of his interesting background. Yes, he had a lot of things happen to him as a child, but what's interesting is even the path that he eventually got on right out of college and how he chose music over a writing career. So let's begin. Mikel was born in Santa Monica, California. But what's interesting was he was born in an experimental commune society called Synonym. Now, that society has a very, very sketchy background. You can look it up in Wikipedia what happened to them, but right now, all of those communes are closed. They don't exist anymore. But they were raised there and raised in Synonym schools all throughout their early years. On top of that, his father was incarcerated in Chino State Prison as his background. He also battled drugs, he had a heroin addiction, and his mother was a social worker who had a master's degree, who they, of course, met. Now, since their family had such a bad, you could say, living condition on that commune, the commune got violent, it was very unstable. His mother actually took Mikel and his brother to go live in Oakland, and then they eventually ended up moving to Oregon. But despite all that happening, Mikel eventually moved to live with his father and new stepmother in Los Angeles right around high school. And despite all of this chaotic background, living on communes, living in a violent area, moving in with his mother moving them away to Oregon. In high school, he actually graduated with a 4.3 GPA. He was involved in a lot of different clubs and a lot of different programs, and because of all that hard work, he later was invited to attend Stanford University, where he actually graduated with honors after college. After college, though, this kind of transitions into his new phase of life. He was writing songs. He had an interest in music. He grew up playing instruments, especially guitar. He liked to sing, but again, he was very focused on his writing. He had a literary background. He loved to read books. He loved to write articles. And that's literally what he did coming out of college. He wrote for different famous magazines. He wrote for different books, including a book club that included Stephen King. His work was, I wouldn't say well-known, but he got some recognition. But what's interesting, in one of his interviews, he stated that he eventually landed a job as a music critic, where he would write critic articles for albums, for songs, and so forth. And he got fed up writing about it. It all eventually came to a head. To quote an article here about him, it says that Mikel began seriously writing songs following a week in March 2006. So he is almost 30 years old at this point. In that span of time, he underwent a breakup, he learned his mother had been diagnosed with cancer, and he found out that he had an autoimmune disorder diagnosis for himself. Everything just completely spiraled in his life. To quote himself, he said, on top of all those things happening, a bum threw up on him and a truck ran over his cat. It just seemed like everything, again, was just going wrong in his life. He was just wondering what was happening, why was all these things happening, and he wanted to express it. He wanted to express everything he was going through. He was sick of critiquing other people's work, and he felt like he could do it. Now, the band that he eventually ended up performing with Airborne Toxic Event, had to get pieced together. All of them didn't really know each other at very first. It was just him and one other person. He had to kind of walk around Los Angeles, pick up different pieces of the puzzle, and then they got the Airborne Toxic Event. So the band name itself was named in a book, White Noise, where an Airborne Toxic Event happens. So they came up with the name. They started writing some songs. They started composing them, and then they released their debut album. Their debut album actually received very favorable reviews, especially from the LA Times, from Newsweek, from Entertainment Weekly, and even the Boston Herald named their album the debut album of the year. Now, around this period of time, iTunes was actually just getting their feet underneath them as well. And iTunes named their lead single off their debut album sometime around midnight the #1 alternative song of the year. At the end of the year, it was certified gold single. They were signed to a couple of different record companies, and they developed a very loyal fan base. It seemed right off the bat, they struck gold with audiences. They started catching on. They started making the rounds on the TV circuits, performing on talk shows, and they even performed at Coachella, at Lollapalooza. They performed at the Greek Theater, Central Park Stage, Red Rocks, and then they even toured with the Colorado Symphony. Right away, it just seemed like the Airborne Toxic Event caught steam, and this immediately caused them to release the second album. Not long after, they filmed a live performance on a DVD. They released a third album, and they've released many albums since. Now, sad to say, his father died in 2015, but he did get married, and they now have a son and daughter. Looking back and kind of tying this entire episode together, we started out by talking about Mikel's family life, how he had such a weird upbringing, living on a commune, a violent commune at that. Well, Mikel reflected on that, especially in the early years of COVID, and he wrote a memoir based off of his early life called Hollywood Park, which also released an album under Airborne Toxic Event under the same name, Hollywood Park, and it debuted at #8 in the New York Times bestseller list when it was released. Just taking all this into consideration, you could see that not only did Mikel's music career pan out, but he circled back around and did his writing career, look back at it, and even ended up releasing a memoir. Such a unique person. Wanted to touch on him, and thank you all for listening.